the shoot, the WAP, Orange Justice, etc. Your parents think these dancers are odd. You think they're hot. But don't be alarmed. Your parents' thought their dances were weird, and you're gonna think your kids' dances are weird. It's just how it happens. This is normal progressions of culture. This is the normal progression of trends and fads. I mean, when you look at me, I'm wearing a plaid jacket with jeans. My top button is unbuttoned. Who would do such a thing? My dad sure as heck won't wear anything like that. But today there's something going on called business casual that didn't exist, and hipster style, and those things clashed into me being allowed to wear a plaid jacket with a top button unbuttoned and jeans. I might get real crazy and put sneakers on. I got dress shoes on right now, so don't sweat. Don't shoot.
Thanks for tuning in. As always, share. Tell me what you think in the comments below, and we will continue to bring you excellent content. And if you haven't already, subscribe.
So today, ladies and gents, we're going to talk about a time period that had those type of cultural happenings, those type of cultural developments clashing together to make a very exciting time in our American history that we now call the Roaring '20s. The Roaring '20s is real deep, especially if you want to go into every aspect of culture and politics and the economy, but right now we're going to focus on art. The arts, music and dancing and writing and visual arts. Jazz music develops in the 20s and gets horribly popular. And the interesting thing about jazz music is it is in and of itself a collection of different cultures blending together. In Louisiana, where there was a lot of diversity, you get European horns, African rhythms, gospel melodies, and structure. And you have a very danceable, very upbeat, very emotion-filled type of music that sweeps the nation. The interesting and probably most important, in my opinion, part about this music is this is a music that crosses lines. It is a African American art form that gained popularity amongst white populations in a time that nativism was starting to rise up again. But there was also some concern. There was some concern with, this isn't real music. Let's just take a look at what it is. We're combining different styles and different practices. And in the midst of it, to make it good, somebody has to take their skill and their know-how and just let it flow. There's improvisation, not following the sheet music perfectly to make a beautiful sound, but following your feeling and your talent and the moment. Just be in the moment and work it out and make a beautiful sound. This is something that some people didn't appreciate. This is something that some people thought was actually bad for music or bad for society. The movements and gyrations that felt good and fit with the music sometimes were looked at as obscene or too provocative or just too silly for a young adult to be doing. That's a childlike gesture. Jazz music becomes one of the big vehicles that starts this very uncomfortable discussion about segregation and desegregation. Jazz musicians are playing in the clubs, the cotton clubs and so forth, that black people are not allowed to eat in. They can be on the stage, they can be in the kitchen, but they can't have a dinner there. That's an interesting question. Who was dancing to this jazz music? Let's talk flappers. I'm not talking about birds. I'm talking about a youthful counterculture, mostly women, young ladies that shocked their grandparents like they never expected. These girls wore floppy, loose-fitting clothing. They did large dance gestures that young ladies didn't do in the past. They cut their hair short. They smoked in public. And these new activities, even though we know that smoking is bad now, these new activities they thought weren't bad, and that they were not trying to cause trouble. We're just being ourselves. We are just taking the next step for women. Why did women have this new role, especially these young ladies? Why did they explore their public identities in ways they never had? Well, it's not that simple. You have women playing a new role in the household. You have women gaining the right to vote early in the 20s. You have a number of things that change and empower women to behave differently. They're going to not just behave different culturally, they're also going to have a bigger voice in our society. They're also going to try to take on different roles as the following generations. The reason why women were smoking in public, they made it look so cool. There were advertisements, there was mass media for the first time. I mean, very commonly in a modern day world, you'll have a logo on your chest. That wasn't very common back then. It wasn't common at all. Or in the top corner. Today, we have mass media everywhere. We see it on our cell phone games in between rounds. We see it on jerseys or professional teams in the corner, on the stamp, or on the back. This is the era that people just didn't want to have quality, but they wanted to have a logo, a symbol that represented that quality. So people knew when you see that logo, it stands for a brand and it stands for a particular quality. Now, the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance, when you talk about the 1920s and art, there's no way you can get around the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance was an explosion of artistic expression in Harlem. The United States was experiencing what they called the Great Migration in history. The Great Migration is where large numbers of African Americans moved north from the South. Generations after slavery, some felt that there still was not a lot of progress for them to experience in the South. So they moved to big cities like Chicago and DC and Philadelphia and New York. And obviously, they settle in areas where they're comfortable and they can develop a culture together. They're around people that are like them. The Harlem area of New York City becomes the bed and the cradle where the Harlem Renaissance grows and is nurtured. Writers, painters, other artists, musicians express what it meant to be black, the struggles that they're having in their life, the successes and joys that they find in everything from their family to their spirituality. They explored topics that weren't explored before, and the most powerful thing about this Harlem Renaissance is it was yet another and one of the earliest and most powerful collections of art that was admired by the masses. And then we get into the topic of the theater. The black theater was a very interesting thing. And as black entertainment became popular, many of the leading voices wanted to know, how do we deal with the attention from the general public? Getting success in the mainstream, is that going to make this any less ours, any less authentic? So the term "for us, by us" is actually invented. Webb Du Bois makes the comment, made for African Americans, by African Americans, about African Americans, and somewhere near the African American community. Now, if the general public, the white community, immigrants, etc., want to partake, they can come to us and allow us to share with them. We also have the artistic expression of what they call the lost generation. After seeing a war and tools of warfare that nobody ever imagined a few generations prior to, carnage and death on a level that people forgot about in the United States, people started to think, what's the purpose of it all? This is very trivial. So a number of writers started to live a bohemian lifestyle, travel around. Many settled in Europe, in various places, and they wrote about various topics that were unexplored prior to. One such topic ends up giving us the framework and the nicknames and the legend and the mythology of the 1920s. The book The Great Gatsby, wait, I can't do this justice. I mean, I tell you, it's a book that you're probably going to read in high school or college if you take lit classes, especially American Lit. I wish I can give it the justice it deserved, like I was like some college lit professor. Actually, I know a college lit professor. Ladies and gents, let me introduce you to my good friend, Professor Awesome.
Hi, I'm Dr. Richard Scott Nokes. I'm a professor of English at Troy University in Troy, Alabama. I'm also known as Professor Awesome. The Great Gatsby really defines for us the Roaring Twenties. One of the interesting things about The Great Gatsby is the way that it creates the myth of the Roaring Twenties. Now, when we say the myth, sometimes in common conversation, we mean myth to say mean something that people believe but is not really true. But in literature, we say myth. We mean a story that has some kind of cultural power. And a myth. Well, let's look at the characters in The Great Gatsby in the broadest sense. You've basically got two kinds of characters. You have characters who are old money, who represent the old world. And then you have characters, like Gatsby, for example, who are not old money, who are what you might consider self-made men. And on the one hand, people talk about them like they admire them, but in truth, they only admire really what they can get from them. And there's this sense that you had the old money of America, and now this sort of new prosperous class is trying to get into or become part of the wealthy class, the old money class, and whether that's going to work out or not. The Great Gatsby, as a book, seems pretty pessimistic about whether it can work out, whether it can work for them. Of course, a lot has been said about jazz and the role of jazz in The Great Gatsby, and jazz is a kind of musical improvisational style. It become very popular. And what's interesting is that the improvisational style of jazz lends very easily either to appreciating it as a kind of more freewheeling form of music, but also as a form of noise. In this jazz era time, the question between what is good and what is ugly noise in music also applies here, because the characters all seem not just to be enjoying the fruits of the society, but also to be in a kind of frenzy and to have become morally unhinged. And there's this kind of fear in Fitzgerald that things have become unmoored from morality. Also, there have been some real big technological innovations that occurred. Things like, in these, we start to see that part of this optimism is that there are all these new spectacles. Think of how many of these things have to do with what you see and what you hear, and the question about whether those things are good and wholesome or not. And Gatsby, in essence, is producing a kind of image, trying to attract the image of Daisy that he has. And what he doesn't understand in some ways is the false image he is projecting of himself. Is trying to attract a false image of Daisy, who really is herself kind of morally empty. And I suppose the final technology that I want to point to is the automobile. In the 1920s, suddenly you see the rise of the mass-produced automobile. The automobile before the First World War was not really a thing that the average person could have. But by the time you get to after the First World War, and into the Roaring Twenties, we now suddenly have the automobile being this new thing that has changed the world. At the time, the automobile, while not exactly a new technology, was finally a thing that the average person could possibly have. And the question was, is it good to be moving this fast? And are we maybe moving out of control? And ultimately, the myth that Fitzgerald ends up building in The Great Gatsby, through these characters, through placing them in this historical context, is this idea that in the jazz age, we were seeing lots of bright new colors, hearing lots of interesting new sounds, we were moving really fast, but we were heading for a terrible accident. I'm Professor Awesome.
There you have it. The 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, was a cultural revolution. It takes culture sometimes. It takes real life to move a society forward. And sometimes it takes this type of culture to influence the powers that be in the government. if people are writing about, singing about, behaving in certain ways, eventually that is going to be reflected in policy. I want to thank all of you guys for tuning in. I want to thank Professor Nokes for helping us out. Always like, share, and subscribe. Always leave a comment or question or what you want to talk about next. I'll see you soon.
Thanks for tuning in. As always, share, share, share. Tell me what you think in the comments below, and we will continue to bring you excellent content. And if you haven't already, subscribe.